Keir Starmer has already ripped down a portrait of Margaret Thatcher at number 10 Downing Street. Can't bear to see the old Tory leader hovering over him. He's now taken down a portrait of the 19th century Liberal leader Gladstone, William Gladstone, and also Queen Elizabeth III, and also the explorer Sir Walter Raleigh. Apparently, they all had links to slavery. Gladstone's links to slavery was his dad had plantations on which slave workers toiled. That's not exactly Gladstone's fault, is it? But he's getting torn down from Downing Street because Keir doesn't want to be seen anywhere near anyone who even knew what the word slave meant. It's just ridiculous. It's pathetic. It's pathetic. Now, before we get to that, though, taking your calls, by the way, at 8:30. So get on the phone. Let me know what you think about a lot of these issues, particularly the migrant crisis. This government is secretly seeking to do a deal with a contractor for more than £500 million in order to place and to deal with migrants that come across the Channel for the next 10 years, at least 10 years. This is the government that said it was going to solve the crisis. We'll get in, oh yeah, we'll smash the people smuggling gangs. We'll solve the... Unlike the Tories, we'll solve the crisis. 10 years, £500 million. They're secretly, they have no intention of solving this crisis, partly because they don't know how to, but I think mainly because they don't want to. They like migrants coming. There's your problem. 03444991000. But first, let's talk about slavery and reparations. Next week in Samoa, in the Pacific, the Commonwealth Heads of Government will gather for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, a kind of annual event. And at this event, the Caribbean nations, led by Barbados Prime Minister Mia Mottley, will demand from Britain potentially, wait for it, drum roll, £19 trillion reparations to compensate for the horrors of slavery. Now, it has been indicated that the British government won't be paying them this money. But when you think about Britain hating Starmer, he's guilt-ridden about the empire. You can see the way he is, like what he did with the Chagos Islands. You wonder, the government says it won't be paying this money, but you wonder if they'll stick to this. You wonder if secretly old Britain-hating Starmer might start handing money to these nations that demand reparations. I say, absolutely not. Don't be ridiculous. No one alive, no one living is responsible for the slavery that the Caribbean nations suffered. So why should we pay for something we didn't do? I think we should say to these nations, no ifs, no buts, stop asking us for reparations for something that we knew nothing about, that happened before we were alive, because we're not going to pay you. Let's talk to author and sociologist Frank Furedi. Hello, Frank.
How are you?
I'm very well. What are your feelings about this? I mean, Caribbean nations, or lots of nations around the world, continue to demand reparations for slavery. There are two things about this. First of all, Britain is the country responsible for the abolition of slavery. We set the ball rolling, something like, I think, if I'm trying to remember, 30, 40 years before America got on board. And secondly, I just think it's insane to expect a nation like Britain and other Western nations to hand over money for a punishment for something that none of us are responsible, that no one living is responsible for. That strikes me as not logical. It strikes me as kind of insane. So I'm saying it's time to tell these Caribbean nations, stop asking us for this, because it's nonsensical and we will never pay you.
Well, I think it's a bit of a hustle. It's a kind of a case of it's basically sort of getting the head to go around and basically hustling for money. But it seems to me that what is really horrible here is that for over a couple of decades, they've been trying to make people in Britain and other Western nations feel guilty for something that their ancestors centuries ago might have done. And there seems to be this idea that it doesn't matter that there's been a different era, that the centuries have gone by. You and I and anybody else are no less responsible for what happened 300 years ago than the people who lived at that time. And I think it's a case that having guilt-tripped Britain about being like the source of global racism, and having invented this idea that somehow we are inherently responsible for all the bad things that are still going on in the Caribbean, there seems to be this victim narrative that basically means that they can demand a blank check, not just now, but forever. Because should any government be stupid enough to give even a dime, even 10 pence for this cause, then they'll be back tomorrow or the day after tomorrow for decades to come, arguing that the problem is still there, we're still traumatized, we still haven't overcome the impact that slavery has had on us, and therefore you have got to have an obligation to provide us with more money. And if Britain goes in and accepts this kind of hustle and becomes complicit in perpetuating it, then it's going to be not only bad for Britain, for the taxpayers, it's going to be bad for the people of the Caribbean, who will learn to become addicted to free handouts from Western nations into the indefinite future. So all around, this is a really bad idea.
And you said earlier that you think that these Caribbean nations and indeed other national leaders calling for reparations on slavery, they're basically hustling on the off chance they might get some money. As I say, what I'd like Britain to turn round, and they'll never do it because of today's sensibilities, I'd like us to turn around and say, listen, you can say this as much as you like, we will never, ever pay you because it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think we got to tell them that, you can't guilt trip us forever. Not everyone's going to be taken in by this. We have a very good track record of dealing with problems from the past. 21st century British people have got nothing to do with slavery, any more than 21st century British people have got to do with the slavery in ancient Egypt or in ancient Greece. For 4,000 years, there's evidence of slavery in almost every society. We cannot hold those societies today responsible for what happened before, what their ancestors did. And the very idea that you could even try this on indicates that there's something horrible that's going on culturally, because the reason why they're doing it and the reason why they feel so kind of confident that they can get away with this is because they know that many Western nations, Britain included, have internalized this sense of guilt and sense of shame for no reason other than the fact that that's the only narrative that they heard. I think British people, and the British elites in particular, have got to stop feeling ashamed and feel guilty for anything that might have happened a long time before they were born. The old biblical story about the sins of the father is just as relevant in the 21st century as it was in biblical times.
Well, funny enough, Frank, in just a little while we're going to be covering the story of old Keir Starmer's war on the Downing Street art, the pictures he doesn't like. He's already taken down Margaret Thatcher. Well, he's about to take down, apparently, also William Gladstone. And the word is because Gladstone has got links to slavery. So what are old Gladstone's? Bearing in mind, I worked this out, he was 24 years old when Britain abolished slavery. So pretty much a young guy, hardly responsible for slavery and the evils of the slave trade. But it turns out that his dad, his father, owned plantations that, of course, were worked by slave labour. So he had slaves work. So William Gladstone is being punished because his dad owned plantations, which actually feeds into the absurdity of what I'm talking about. The sins of the father should not be visited upon the son, and the sins of historical Britain that is long gone should not be visited on modern Britain. It doesn't make sense. Why do we gather around this lunacy?
I think there is a horrible development, which is that we look upon the past and we have decided that somehow everything that Britain did in the past is shameful. And you have all these, what I call grievance archaeologists, who are looking back in the past and they say, oh, here's Gladstone, here's another politician. Maybe their father or their uncle or their great-grandfather or somebody in their family might have some indirect relationship to slavery. And if they do, then they get indicted. And it doesn't matter that there's any direct link. Just simply the suggestion that there might be a link is enough to basically either demand compensation or to kind of target them and condemn them or demonize them for what they are. Gladstone, might not have been the most accomplished politician in the 19th century, but he was a very formidable prime minister. And he had a very strong commitment to reform. So the very idea that a reforming British prime minister is now treated as an outcast, as somebody that we should be ashamed about, violates what history should really be all about. And it just tells us that people are not able anymore to get a real objective account of what Britain did in the 19th century.
Indeed, we led the way. We helped the world go a long way towards abolishing slavery. We started it. But we're now left with this absurdity, Frank, where, King Charles, last year, 2023, he went to a gathering of Commonwealth leaders, not unlike the one they're going to have next week in Samoa, where he was told, well, you can sort of say sorry, but you can't apologise on the part of Britain in case the Commonwealth countries use it as a legal gambit to sue us for reparations. So the King had to resort to saying this: I cannot describe the depths of my personal sorrow at the suffering of so many as I continue to deepen my own understanding of slavery's enduring impact. In other words, our monarch has to play silly word games in order not to plunge this country into trouble in terms of having to pay this money out. Well, this is just, frankly, why can't the King go and say, listen, we regret it. We're really sorry. We're really sorry it happened. Obviously, everybody hates the slave trade. We wish it didn't happen. But let's face it, none of us have ever known any slave traders. It was two to three centuries ago. It's time to move on. Why can't we do something common sense like that? Instead, we have to play word games and we have to pay respect to these demands for reparations, even though it's pretty clear we're fairly reluctant to ever hand over any money, and yet we have to play this game. But it's just mad, isn't it?
It is. I think you have to remember that Britain is running short of statesmen, genuine statesmen, who have the courage to stand up and say what needs to be said. And unfortunately, even members of the royal family have been infected by this form of behavior where you are so pragmatic, you're so diplomatic, you're basically apologizing for your existence. But that's really what's been done here. We're apologizing for our existence, that we ever existed as a nation, that, we had a culture, we had an empire, we had an industrial outlook on the world, that we created the Industrial Revolution. We've got to apologize for everything that has happened in the past. And I think that until we have some serious statesmen who give you a balanced view of what needs to be done, who have got the courage to push back against these unreasonable demands, you are going to have these word games. And these word games have consequences, because even if you don't pay a single penny to these hustlers, it's still going to be the case that a lot of people in Britain will think that somehow we're guilty, we should have given them some money, we're being unreasonable. Unless you challenge the narrative of slavery having an impact today on people's lives, challenge the narrative that we're responsible for that, we are going to be paying a very heavy price in terms of the impact that it has, particularly on the younger generations.
Last question, Frank. Do you feel that under Keir Starmer, do you think under this sort of socialist regime, that a kind of national self-loathing, a self-loathing of Britain is on the rise?
I think it is, but unfortunately, this has been a long time coming, and it's been around under the Tories as well. I think all that has happened now is that the door has been opened even more, and there's even less inhibition, less embarrassment about lashing out against our own past, against our glories, against what we believed in. And this scenario in Downing Street, where pictures are being taken down, in a sense, sends out a very, very clear message that Downing Street is going to be a very different institution, a different building, where anything that's remotely old, anything that's remotely about our past, is somehow going to be pathologized.
I think so. Frank, thank you so much for your time. Always a pleasure. Thank you very much. That's Professor Frank Furedi there, author and sociologist. He's right, isn't he? I mean, this is what this is all about. It's about self-loathing as a nation. Keir Starmer hates this country. These lefties in number 10 now, the cabinet, they don't like this country. They buy into all that imperial, evil nation that, you know, conquered the world and did tremendous damage. Well, you know, the empire wasn't all good, but it had a lot of good things about it. And we were the country that took our empire and used it to go a long way towards stamping out outright slavery around the world. We used our own empire to stamp out slavery because we knew it was implicitly wrong. So the idea that we're some kind of evil imperial state that does nothing but bad is for the birds. It's nonsense. It's nonsense. And yet this is the attitude that prevails right now. So we have this conference next week whereby we will pay lip service. Oh, you want reparations? You want £19 trillion? Well, we'll definitely think about it. We're taking your demands very seriously. I think we should turn around to these people and say, we're not taking your demands seriously. They're ridiculous. They're ludicrous. And get this, you are never getting a single penny out of us for slavery. Got it? Got it? Write it down. OK? Because this ritual where they demand it, and we go, oh, yes, we're personally sorry, but we're not sure how far we go. No, just tell them to do one. It's absurd.